Welcome to Transformation, a conversation about smart growth in great neighborhoods. We're doing this today because the Mass Smart Growth Alliance is going through a transformation. We're going through professional transformation as staff. The world is going through transformation, and we thought it would be good to have a little reflective space for this moment in time. I'm really proud of this team and the work that we've done over the years. We're all very different, but we work together very well. I think we've all learned that building community requires some pretty different perspectives and skills and personalities, and in order to create a community. And I think we've done that. So let's do introductions. Dottie, let me start with you and ask to introduce yourself and tell us how you got involved in this work.
Sure. Well, my name's Dottie Fulginetti, and I live in Easton, Mass, which is a suburb of Boston, about half an hour south of Boston. And I'm chair of the select board in that town, so I'm in my third term. And while I got involved in being a select board is our housing policy in our town was kind of confusing and didn't seem to have the direction. Housing started to pop up and people in the community were questioning it. So I got involved to learn more about it and then realized that it would be great to have a plan where we wanted to have the housing, how we wanted to see that, and how that fit in with the community. And so that's why I ran for office, and to advocate for the right housing in the right places and affordable. And then when this job came up with the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance for a director of local leadership, that job was to go around and talk to communities and business groups and make the connection between housing, transportation, environment, and workforce development as well. So it was a perfect fit for me, and I really have learned so much in that process. Just for myself personally, professionally, I've been able to share a lot of great experiences with communities all over the state and then bring a lot of best practices back to my town too.
Thanks, Dottie. How about you, Annabelle?
Sure. My name is Annabelle Rondon, and I live in Hebrew, a little bit about 35 minutes up north from New York, from Boston. And I manage the Great Neighborhoods program for MSGA. And I actually started in this field about 17 years ago, and I landed in this field by accident. I was working in Lawrence as a organizer for small business community. They were really trying to organize the bodegas and some sort of the small shop in the downtown of Lawrence. And I jumped in, and it was actually through a work study opportunity at the Northern Essex Community College when I was taking ESOL classes. So I fell in love with the field right away. I felt like just talking to some sort of the community and being able to come back into the organization and think about strategies, how to improve either the quality of life or interventions around like how to improve the business community was something that I really, really love. And I transitioned right away into the foreclosure advocacy work. And I really love, I think, the whole aspect of advocacy piece when I was actually trying to save people's home. And that's when I actually started working more in the housing space. And I did a little bit of work, similar work in New York City, and I worked for a government housing institution there and also did a little bit of planning. And then transitioned back. I was a little bit homesick and came back to Boston and landed at MSGA, which I've been doing more of a cultivating a network of practitioners and advocates in the field.
Great, thank you. How about you, Larry?
Larry Field, Deputy Director. I focus on the policy work at Smart Growth Alliance. I feel like I have lived a smart growth life long before there was a movement or a name for it. I grew up in a dense urban place, and then we moved to a farm. And so I walked into public transportation and appreciated natural resources. And I've chosen to live in a very urban place, Cambridge. and hike in the mountains. And I moved professionally into doing smart growth during the Patrick administration. I started out practicing law, and eventually when I got to the Patrick administration in the second term, I started focusing on housing and smart growth development there, and then came to the Smart Growth Alliance when the governor finished his term in 2015.
Right. And for me, I've always been interested in how do people build community. And I think that comes from the fact that when I was, younger, basically in my teen years, we had, my family went through a rough time. We had a small business that failed, and we lost our house to foreclosure. So it was always it was interesting to me to understand how people, especially that are facing instability, try to create a community around them and build a stable place for them. And so when I was able to, I went to Mexico City and did some graduate studies there. I actually unexpectedly ended up living in what's called an irregular settlement, where people are, from rural areas or from other parts of the city are building really new neighborhoods at the outskirts of the city. And so that process fascinated me and really brought me into the urban planning world before I came back here. So thanks for warming up, introducing who you are. Since we talk about smart growth, and we've been the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance, and I know there's a lot of confusion about that term. And so I just want to have a first question to all of you, and just want you to jump in, is what does smart growth really mean to you? When somebody asks you what smart growth is, how do you define it?
Well, I guess, Larry, are you going?
I'm just going to say that when I'm in a social setting, and so I have to do it very quickly, I just say that smart growth is really the intersection of land use, climate, transportation, and that there's equity thread that runs through it.
I guess I would say similar to that, and also, because I'm in the suburbs describing it out here, is that, if communities are building, you want to build strategically and in a way that makes the most sense to your environment. Building your housing near transportation and near places where there's walkable neighborhoods, where people, if you have all the places in your town where you can build denser in areas that have more amenities, that people can walk to grocery stores or walk to public spaces or things like that. It's really kind of a step back into the olden days when they built the town villages, and saw then that it made a lot of sense to have people live close by, and it really builds a nice tight-knit community, and you can create those little villages all over your town. But it makes sense to do it like that versus build the houses very far apart and create sprawl from a municipal perspective. It makes it hard to support those with utilities. And it's also kind of a way that isolates people from each other.
I'll explain it the way that I actually explain it to my parents and my family, because it's usually when I try to break it down, because they actually see my work more related to what I used to do in Lawrence, which is more like community development, community organizing. And I actually see it the same way, but with an extended lens around bringing more stakeholder into the conversation. I feel like community development is very about taking collective action of residents and people, some sort of activists on the ground. And I feel like smart growth really is bringing different set of stakeholder into the conversation, engaging, municipalities and some sort of what we call the grass tops, right? Some sort of the legislators and some of that like elected official space into the conversation. And I also see another added piece, I think, aside from what I did in some sort of in the community development space, which is climate, climate change lens into the work as well.
Well, Annabelle, Larry mentioned the different issues that could be part of smart growth. And you know, I know when my kids were little and I was doing this work, it was really hard to explain to them what, you know, what it was exactly that I did with all these different issues. But over the years, I think we've learned new ways of talking about it, and you know, I think that comes under the frame of Great Neighborhoods, which is the program you lead. So, do you want to say something about that?
Sure. So Great Neighborhood is actually a platform for activism. How do you activate residents and advocates on the ground who want to see change in their communities? Change meaning um, more inclusive development, decision making, but also something as simple as changing a zoning ordinance in their community, something like bringing ADUs into their community. So we actually, through the Great Neighborhoods program, have been activating those voices on the ground to be not only be equipped to talk about those issues, but also take action, right? And try to include different voices in the conversation, and also influence change in the community. And another piece that we actually have been working on in the last couple of years is also on the leadership component. Like, how do we bring more talents of color, specifically planners of color, into the work? We feel that's a piece that is specifically that speak to what's happening around the world around racism, right? Like, how do we add more diverse voices to the table and to the decision making process in community development or smart growth space?
Right. And for me, just in terms of Great Neighborhoods, I think the way we came upon the Great Neighborhoods concept to begin with was partly because we had trouble really talking about smart growth and explaining it to people without making a laundry list of issues like transportation and climate and equity and housing, and you know, and so I think people understand what makes a great neighborhood. They recognize it, they feel it. So I feel like that was a really important lesson that we learned along the way, was how to make a spiritual connection or emotional connection between people and this work, and the intellectual and policy arguments that we also have to make to decision makers.
And something actually that I will say also to add to that, Andrea, is like also, and it's one of the top takeaways from this work for me, is transforming the way people work together, which is the slogan that we have been utilizing lately for the program. I think I came to this work thinking about diversity, but thinking about diversity in a racial, some sort of context, right? But I feel like in this, part of this, some sort of my process at the MSGA and my work is to really transform the way to see the issues by including diverse perspective into the conversation, right? Not only thinking about the talents of color, but also like, what are the perspectives missing at the table? Who are the stakeholders that we should be thinking about in this conversation? Is something that we do to the tea drinks, like who are the activists or residents that are not usually at the table, and how do we empower them to be part of the decision-making process?
Well, and you mentioned TO Drinks. Can you just explain that real quick?
Yes, TO Drinks is actually an organizing strategy that we implemented a couple of years, 3 years ago. Essentially is a social network event, and we invite different stakeholders, specifically activism or residents, to come and meet other residents. There's not an agenda. We usually meet at a local bar and just hang out. And after that, we try to we generate a list of some sort of the attendees and encourage some sort of action afterwards. So essentially a happy hour, let's put it that way. And is a way we've been actually being intentional about inviting, as I mentioned, people who are usually not connected to each other. Like, for example, the housing activists, maybe they don't talk as often to the transportation or environmental activists in their community. So this is an opportunity to bring them all together and talk about, again, transforming the way that they work together and connect about these issues on the ground.
Right. And they're always in a transit-oriented location, which is why they call TO Drinks.
TO Drinks, right.
So Dottie, you're an elected official in your suburban community of Easton, and how, the suburbs are a different environment than, a Cambridge or a Boston. How do you talk about these issues and advance them in your community?
Well, it's tough in the suburbs. And when we were looking at some of the first housing at the beginning of my time on the board, there was a lot of public resistance. And in most suburban communities, there can be a lot of public resistance towards any kind of change, but especially housing. Change is scary for communities, and dense housing or multifamily housing or apartments or condos. Um, the suburban communities look at that like city life, and it's hard to describe how that can coexist and still blend in with your community. So it's great to use examples of what we've seen in other places, and so people can visualize what would that look like in their town. And I think that when people can see it like that, after we had one of the first developments, which was the Shovel Works, it was the redevelopment of an old factory that was in our historic district. No one could imagine what that could look like. And when it was completed, it's really one of the highlights of affordable housing in the state. And it looks like it's always been there, and nothing bad happened. And it just fit right in. And so it was made it easier to be able to introduce more housing in other parts of town. But it really is, it's still a barrier. At our town meeting the other night, we had a lot of younger people coming to town meeting to talk about looking at lots of change that they want to see in the future. And one of the things that I suggested to them is, we need you in the room when we're talking about these things. You're not going to be able to live in our town if we don't have more housing that's affordable to you, and the amenities to go with it. You can't have a sleepy town with no fun things to do. So we're hoping to get more young people engaged. I do some work with the Massachusetts Municipal Association, active on their policy committee. So I try to share some of those ideas in conjunction with my work with the Smart Growth Alliance to other communities as well.
Right, thanks. Well, one of the big barriers in the suburbs to creating more walkable places is the zoning rules. And, Larry, I know you and I have worked on zoning issues in the state for a long time now. Why is it so hard to make progress on that issue?
Massachusetts vests the control over zoning and permitting locally, but we've got a state legislative framework that kind of sets the parameters. And we've been working on changing the statewide rules, but it seems like this is one of those issues where it's a zero-sum game. On one end, the Massachusetts Municipal Association and a good number of the local leaders and voters want to maximize local control. And on the other side, the real estate trade associations and many of the developers, including affordable housing developers, feel that local control, excessive local control, is the problem. So each of those two sides has enough power to block substantial change, but not enough power to push through change. And so that leaves us at an impasse. And it is likely that we won't have any kind of comprehensive zoning reform until the legislature is willing to force each of those sides to make concessions. One of the things that is striking about the governor's Housing Choices bill is that it is the first time in literally decades that there has been a major proposal that both the MMA and the real estate trade associations agree on. And so that's why I think we and many others feel strongly about getting that passed. as imperfect as it is in the sense that it does not solve all of the problems. I think particularly because if something like housing choices can't pass, the legislature may say really nothing is going to be able to get passed on zoning.
Thanks, Larry. One of the things, I think one of the best things about working for the Mass Smart Growth Alliance is the fact that we get to work with so many different people and organizations across so many different issues. We get to work with public, private, nonprofit, local leaders, as well as environmental, transportation, planning groups, housing groups. So, you know, looking at the world and our network of folks that we work with, you know, can you talk a little bit about that experience, and who do you think is either inspiring or doing some really, really good work or have been important allies for you? Who wants to jump in first? Do you want to take that one, Annabelle?
Sure. Oh my God, so many great allies and friends and partners in this process. I want to probably point out to one of a person that is not only is a woman, is a Latina, but also someone that has inspired me before even joining MSGA is Vanessa Calderon. She is someone that I actually had a chance to work with her as part of the Tia Drinks in Milton, and she was phenomenal. But I knew her work before coming to MSGA, specifically doing the foreclosure prevention process. And we used to interact a lot at Chapa, and she's so sharp, and I feel like also doing great work on the ground and representing the Latino community voices on the ground in Boston. And I told her this. I'm like, I hope someday you can be my mentor. You're so busy that you cannot. Like she's doing so many great things, and she's someone that really has inspired me. But again, so many other different allies and friends that I see, so many, like you all, I think, has been inspirational to me as well in the work. And I think I have really appreciated how we all work well and bring different expertise to the table, but also being able to respectfully challenge each other in our point of view. Sometimes that has been, I'm not as, I would say, like I'm a little bit more modest and some sort of pushing back, but I have appreciated you all, and you all different have inspired me differently. So thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Larry? Do you want to jump in?
Sure. Two mayors who have been real smart growth champions, really fearless in advocating for that. Mayor Curtatone, Joe Curtatone of Somerville, and Kim Driscoll of Salem. In the legislature, Senate President Emeritus Harriet Chandler, who's been really passionate about housing. Tim Brennan, the late Tim Brennan, who was the director of the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission for a very long time, really influenced so many people in the state. I would say Senator Markey, he's been the champion for climate change in Congress for decades, before many people were really seriously focused on the issue. I'd like to put Lydia Edwards and Michelle Wu on that list too. They're both very early in their careers, but I think they're both finding their voice. Lydia Edwards on the Suffolk redevelopment proposal, Wu on transportation issues.
I would say that some of the people that I was surprised have strong connections to smart growth have been in the age-friendly community. So people like James Fuccione, who's with the Healthy Aging Collaborative, and AARP. Those groups have really done a lot to try to advance, the connection between smart growth and health equity. And also the business leaders, Greg Riedman at the Newton Needham Chamber, Peter Foreman down in the South Shore Chamber, Chris Cooney in the Metro South Chamber. They're really strong advocates of housing as it connects to workforce and health and all of the other issues that go with that. So I've been really excited to see that we've been able to broaden the field of support and really, I think work well to kind of draw those kind of connections and bring these advocates together.
Yeah. And I have to say something about our steering committee members, just because I've been working with them for the past 12, almost 13 years. Their dedication has been consistent the whole time. And it's really been a privilege to work with such smart, passionate people. And there's not too many tables where you can have that, the perspectives from the environmental organizations. And, Nancy Goodman from the Environmental League of Massachusetts has been the chairperson of MSGA since I've been there. So we've worked together so closely. And, folks from the housing world where I come from, like Joe Kreisberg, MACDC, Mark Drayson. I think he and I have driven each other crazy a little bit sometimes over the years, but we've really pushed each other and in good ways. And and everybody else who's been part of that. Our funders have been really important pieces of the puzzle as well. And the Barr Foundation has funded us like they've funded so many others, and we've been in their climate portfolio. So it was a little bit. Being a land use organization in the climate portfolio was, I think, a bit of a stretch for them at times. And so it's really a testament to them that they kept funding us for such a long period of time. And Mary Skelton Roberts there is always very, I think, entrepreneurial and willing to try new ideas like our Great Neighborhoods program and help get that going. I would say one person.
I'm just going to add, Aaron Gornstein was a member of the steering committee for many years before he became undersecretary at Housing and Community Development, and then running POA, Preservation of Affordable Housing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Aaron was really critical to the founding of the Alliance, and CHAPA has been our fiscal sponsor since we started. So they've been, we were really one of the only smart growth organizations in the country that was founded with kind of equity values and with affordable housing organizations. So I think that has been something unique that we've brought to the table. And the final person I would say, just because this may be a little bit surprising, but I think, City Life, Vita Urbana, Lisa Owens has played a real role in challenging nonprofit organizations like ours and ensuring that there's sort of a moral center to the work. And even though I think our relationship with social justice organizations over the years has been I wouldn't say rocky, but we haven't been close collaborators oftentimes because we're working at the state level and they're often working at the local level, but we've really worked hard to try to bridge that and find alignment. But I think it's really all the work starts with people. And, when you're working at 15,000 feet on policy, you really got to keep people centered in the conversation. And I think they've done a really important job of doing that. So this is a complicated time right now with everything going on. So I want to ask all of you, what you're thinking about. What are the challenges you see for our communities right now? And do you see opportunities? Do you see dangers?
I'll jump in here on that. And I would just say from my perspective in my community, and all across the state and the country, COVID is really creating some terrible challenges, but also some really great opportunities. And, we talk about zoning being a barrier sometimes to, housing, but because we needed to open restaurants quickly and try to find a way to do that, the governor was able to kind of put a hold on some of the zoning that you would normally be required to do that. If a restaurant wants to open up outside, it's not like they can just throw some tables and chairs out there. There usually has to be zoning variances and liquor license processes and permits and permits and more permits. And it's expensive. It takes a long time. It could have taken up to 60 to 90 days under a normal scenario to get outdoor dining. And because we were able to get some of those requirements lifted, we were able to help our restaurants open up outdoors in a matter of a week and do it safely and bring in all of the local, permit people that had to be involved, like Board of Health, inspectional services. So because, necessity is the mother of invention, we had to find a way to do that quickly. And we did it. And I think that that's an opportunity to show that we need to take some more risks with some of the policies that we have, because, even in a test pilot in a short period of time, we're able to see some real innovation that way. And I think that there's, the equity conversation that's going on right now, social justice, that's bringing a lot of opportunity to bring new, younger voices with different ideas to the table about what our community values really are and what it should be. And let's get some new ideas going around issues of housing and economic development. So I think that really is going to be very helpful.
I'll jump in. So the opportunities, I agree with Dottie, are really robust. I think we've seen a lot of local innovation, shared streets in Somerville, Cambridge, and some other places. The fact that we are now much more comfortable with working remotely has a potential long-term benefit, because there are jobs that can be done from home, and that in the long run could help us with the transportation issues that we've got. I would also say that the obvious inequity of how COVID is affecting Black and Brown populations, both the rates of COVID and also economic impact, is really bringing those issues to fore, was bringing them to fore even prior to George Floyd and the national conversation about race. So I think all of that has the potential to work better in a place like Massachusetts, where I think people are open to making changes in the way they live their lives and how they view other people. Annabelle, you want to pick up?
Sure, and not to repeat the same thing that you guys said, I totally agree with that. I think it's connected a little bit to the work that we did at some point around placemaking. Is really it's been really fascinating to see how government institutions and some sort of the permitting process have been a lot more flexible, right? And to try to be innovative. So I definitely see many opportunities on that. Another thing is also Great Neighborhood is going to be housed at Livable Streets starting in July 1st. And I think also the same way that we are seeing opportunities, some sort of how municipalities have been creative and businesses, I think there's also an opportunity in terms of challenging coalitions and conversations. And I feel like there's a lot of attention now around this, racism and how do we diversify the table. And I think there's an opportunity there. I totally have been it's been really actually exciting to see institutions and organizations to publicly announce their commitment to some sort of the conversation. So I think there's an opportunity a little bit to challenge the status quo at this moment.
Sorry, I got dropped off there. I had to go downstairs and tell my whole family to get off the internet.
Welcome back.
Thanks. So what did I miss? Where did you leave off?
We answered that question. Each of us had a chance to do that.
Okay, great. So
how about you, Andre? What do you have in mind at this moment? I don't think you were able to expand on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, getting back to what I said at the beginning about building community, which has always been top of my mind. I feel like we're at a point where a lot of people are vulnerable in terms of where they live, what their future is. And so I'm very interested in how can we change the status quo in ways that make it easier for people to support each other during times like this. And I think, these shocks that we're seeing right now, whether it's COVID or whether it's the uprisings for racial justice, I think this is really just the beginning. We're in a world that's accelerating. Change is happening quicker and quicker, particularly because of climate change and all of the I think the limited resources that we have. So we're going to need to do things in a completely different way. And I've been thinking a lot about that. There's obviously no easy answers, but I feel like there are two ways that we could go forward. One is through this, the powerful protect themselves, everybody basically out for themselves approach, right? And that means that's going to favor the powerful and the wealthy. They're the ones that are going to be able to be in comfortable places. They're going to have communities and continue their life the way they want to. And meanwhile, everybody else will be sort of fighting for the scraps and trying to survive. I think the only other alternative to that is for us to really develop a new social compact where there's an understanding that it's better for everyone if we're all in it together and we are creating new systems that keep our planet healthy and keep our society healthy. And in order to do that, we really have to take care of everybody. So I feel like we're at this really important crossroads right now where we could go either way, and you sort of see both of those things happening. So, for me personally, I think about that and what's my role in that going forward? Can I help in some way? That was a big answer to the question. Bringing it back down a little bit more, closer into Massachusetts, like, what do you all think about, what can we do right now? What are some of the closest opportunities in our field and in our work where we can actually make positive progress?
I'll jump in. Go ahead, Lottie. You want to go?
Nope, go ahead, Annabelle.
Okay. I will say, through now that Great Neighborhood, as I mentioned, is going to be housed at Livable Streets, I'm really eager and excited to see how housing and transportation work together in terms of advocacy. So in the short term, I think that's probably will be some sort of my next immediate action or some sort of exploration phase as we revamp the program. So I'm really looking forward to see how how do we marry the two together in terms of advocacy and providing the tools in the field to enhance those pieces.
I would say we have to really harness the energy and the passion and the outrage and all the emotions of grassroots and grass tops and really just just keep building the momentum, and keep letting our local leaders and our legislative leaders know that we need change. I mean, it seems like bills can get through, very quickly in the pandemic, and we need to really let them know. They want to hear from us. They want to know what is important to us, to help guide them and encourage them, and let them know that they have the support from the communities that they represent to make these kinds of changes. And I think it's tough for any local official or a state official to be out on the edge, making decisions, wondering if they're going to be the right ones, or wondering if they're going to be still loved by their communities that they represent. So they need to hear from us, and we need to tell them how we want them to go forward.
I'm going to be more mundane. The legislature was on the brink of passing some important legislation this year when COVID hit. There was consensus that we needed to have a really robust transportation bond bill, and also bring a lot more new revenue to our transportation infrastructure. And only a very scaled back version of that is going to pass this year, just what is necessary for the system to keep on operating. But that's something that I could see in the next legislative term returns to being a top priority. And I'd say the same is true for climate adaptation. And there was both a proposal by Governor Baker, which would provide new revenue from deeds excise fees for local climate adaptation. And there was an alternative proposal by the Speaker, House Speaker DeLeo, for using borrowed funds to provide a similar kind of climate adaptation, local response. And I think in the next session, there could be something that is, one of those two models, maybe a meld of those two things that gets passed. And that would be something that would be a substantial step.
Well, let's finish up with one question that I want to pose to everybody. If you could do anything, any policy at all, what would you do? And it doesn't have to be one, you can do multiple ones. What do you think, what kinds of policies do you think would really accomplish the goals that we've set out to do?
I'll go first. So I think that we need to rethink governance for the issues that we are focused on, the development, transportation, climate issues, that we're reaching, or we're now in a time when we've got to have a 21st century model of governance, and not really a 19th century, which in many ways we still do with town meeting. And even in many of the cities, having city councils decide on things, but really defer to the counselor from a neighborhood to decide what happens in the neighborhood. We've got to be able to think more regionally. And it's nice to have organizations like MAPC and the other 12 regional planning agencies provide planning and recommendations. But there's no regional authority in the same way that many other states have counties, strong counties that can do a lot of this. So creating a system that's workable, that allows for both regional action and also local input into that is what I would say would be the most important structural thing to do.
How about free public transportation? I'll throw that out there.
I love that. And I think that that's something where we're caught in this assumption that public transportation has to pay for itself. The same way that, or you could critique it in the same way that many people critiqued when a business person came into a newspaper and said, the front page has to make money. Well, front pages are not supposed to make money. They're supposed to provide the content. The same way public transportation has other goals. It is the mobility for the economy. In the present, it is the key to climate change, or is critical to it, because 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. And it has an equity component to it also, because the people who rely on public transportation the most are the people who can least afford to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there really needs to be a training component for the decision makers, to kind of build off what Larry was saying, with the really archaic form of government. When you think about it, the last time I ran for office, I was speaking with a group of older people, and I explained what my role was as the select person, and I said, I'm a volunteer, and we manage an $82 million budget that really makes changes in your day-to-day life. And they were aghast that, your town is basically run by the people who can get the most votes. You don't need any experience. You don't really need any knowledge. You can have great ideas, but once you get into that role, you really do need some training and, investment in that, and even mentoring from people who've done it before. So I'd really like to see more of that, because I think, the closer you are to the ground, that's where a lot of the things happen that really make a difference in your day-to-day life. And I think that training and education would really help people feel more confident to make some of the bolder votes and decisions that we need to have to get out of the status quo.
I want to add to that, Dottie. I feel like also as someone of color, and I hear this a lot from my other friends that are some sort of in a similar space, like it's not a welcoming process, right? Like becoming some sort of like an advocate for your own community is hard, right? And it's intimidating when you even see at the national level some sort of the attack on people of color, some sort of that toxic political space. So is not really welcoming, and I would love to see some changes around that. Like, how do we keep maybe what you said, some sort of a mentorship component somewhere, to try to engage more new leaders, the next generation of leaders, and also the other piece that I will add also is ADU, accessory dwelling apartment. I would love to see more of those happening throughout the region. I feel that it's really hard to have the decision making on the different towns and cities when there's so many complex spaces and political spaces that it make it really hard to pass locally. So I would love to see something more at the state level that is easier to.
Well, Annabelle, you touched on something that we've talked about a lot, which is how do you get more people's voice involved in the decision-making process, right? And like this little one behind you, what's her role in the decision-making process? But I've always thought that if there could be a policy that would say, that would somehow require, the public comments on projects to represent the constituencies in the community. So for example, renters, young people, people of color are really underrepresented in development hearings and comments and decision-making processes. So is there a way for a policy that would kind of require that and hold communities more accountable to doing better outreach and getting them involved? I think that would really be transformational. So one last question. Is there what have you learned during your time at MSGA? And you can also chip in and say, is there something that you've particularly enjoyed about your time here? Dottie, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, as the newest member to the team, I was really struck by how how much work we were able to accomplish together with the four of us, and each one of us bringing our own unique skills. Andre, you just have such a intuition for how to put people together and how to look at things from just a really different perspective. And I really admired that creativity. And Larry, I've learned so much from you with the policy work, and just the processes and how to connect with people in that way. And Annabelle is just such a rock star, just an amazing, amazing, accomplished woman. She just always knows the right thing to say to people and how to get people involved. She's kind of a quieter person that likes to take, a little bit off to the background, but over the time that I've been here, I've really seen you find your voice and really champion some great initiatives. And I'm super excited that you're going to be moving the Great Neighborhoods to Livable Streets Alliance. And I just can't wait to see what you do with that. It's very exciting. But one of the things that I really was an unexpected surprise to me was the equity work. Coming from a predominantly white suburban community, I always thought I valued all people, and I thought I understood a lot about race, and I knew nothing. And I feel like you guys really pushed me to learn more and to understand more, read more, join the book club. And that has been really transformational for me. So I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to learn from all of you, and especially in those ways.
I know you were supposed to be our secret agent, like going out to the suburbs, and you've become like this big racial justice champion now.
Yep. Well, I'm trying. I've tried in my community to really intentionally diversify our boards and committees by reaching out to people that in underrepresented groups. And, it's not easy. It's not easy to get people to want to put themselves out there. So we're going to keep trying and looking for new ways to do that.
How about you, Larry?
Well, I'm going to start by saying that Dottie has shown us the inner life of an elected public official. And that's, something that we probably wouldn't have gotten without your being on the staff. As well as your, I think, really great way of being able to talk about smart growth issues to people who are just beginning to hear about it. I think, speaking for myself, I'm sometimes starting from an assumption that people know a lot about some of our issues when they really don't. So as far as what things I've learned, I think I came in with a lot more expertise on land use issues than I did on climate or transportation. And one of the great things about smart growth, at least the way the Smart Growth Alliance is structured and the work that we do, is that you learn about lots of different parts of the smart growth world. You don't really just focus on one thing.
How about you, Annabelle?
I'm on mute because I have a little one over here cooking next to me. Sorry about any noise.
I hope she's making something great.
She's making coffee. Anyway, so
I
actually came to MSGA with a more like grassroots experience, and I think one of the biggest thing that I could take away from this role was really learning a little bit more about the grassed up space and policy, which is something that we intentionally have been trying to do through Great Neighborhoods. How do we connect the grassroots work more to some sort of statewide space? And I think we've been able to, through the storytelling and communication tools, been able to make that connection. So aside from that, also what I mentioned earlier, I feel like thinking about diversity, not only diversity racially, but more because of I came to those lenses to the table and to the organization, but more like diversity of perspective. I think like we were very intentional every time we will put an event together to think about who was missing, who was the voice geographically throughout the region that was missing. That's something that we really were intentional about that. And I really appreciate how that transformed my way to think about how do we work together and how do we think about different issues. And I feel like also, again, to that geographic representation, I think these issues of smart growth really affect the region differently. And I think that's something that I really took away from this role.
Right. There's two things that I would say for myself. One is that, you know, I never expected my career to be taken up so much on the issue of zoning. And I started working on zoning even before I came to the Alliance 12 years ago when I was working at Lawrence Community Works. And we did, I led a campaign to change our local zoning there, and then brought that sensibility to this work here at the Alliance. But I think what's really, I think what I've learned over the years has been just how corrosive single family zoning has been in our society, and historically the role that it's played in the redistribution of wealth in this country, and the development of our infrastructure and where we are now. So, and I think that over the years, I've become, increasingly convinced that it is at the heart of a lot of our kind of climate challenge and our social challenge. And in particular, the fact that some people don't want to live near other people, and that is a lot of the motivation behind single family zoning, really brings land use back to race, issues of race in this country. And I think understanding that has been really powerful. And I know for me, it brings a lot of kind of, it morally centers the work that we're doing, and makes me very passionate to try to confront those issues directly and make change. The other thing that I would say, just from being running a coalition for such a long time, and I feel like it is at times herding cats, but I think that kind of slow, patient, incremental work is very difficult, but it's also very important because it's, I've seen, certainly from the time that I started back in 2007 to today, the organizational culture at our member groups has really shifted a lot from what they were doing before to what they're doing now. And I feel that even though we're a small organization, we've always been really ambitious, and a lot of our impact has been to inspire innovation, challenge our member organizations, and really, I think, spark them in some ways to innovate themselves. And many of them are then able to build out bigger programs in their fields, right? Whether it's, again, affordable housing or the environmental world or public health world. So I think that, I'm really proud of that work, and that kind of culture change and organizational change, institutional change is important. So, and I think, obviously it's been a pleasure to work with all of you. Some of the most fun times has been, when we could work on projects together. Oftentimes that might be at an event, whether it's a conference or the regional summits that we did, or if we're, trying to help support a local campaign and using all of our different contacts and trying to figure out our different skills and perspectives to help support messaging and coaching. So that's all something that I think is super important. And, I'd like to help to figure out how to continue to support communities and local leaders in that way going forward. And now that we're in a Zoom world, maybe we can all keep doing this. So, any final thoughts?
Thank you, Andre, for all your leadership. during the time we've all been working at the Smart Growth Alliance, but for the entire tenure you've had.
Well, thank you.
Agreed. Thank you, Andre. You've been a tremendous leader, and I've learned so much from you, and hope we'll still be connected for many years.
Hope so.
What they said. Thank you, Andre. I feel like also we will continue to work together. You already signed up to help with revamping Great Neighborhood to the next level of what we've been doing, and I'm very excited to keep collaborating on that.
Well, thanks everyone. Let's sign off here, and I'm sure we'll talk soon. Thanks.